This conference will now be recorded.
Thank you for joining us. We'll give people just one more moment, and then Leslie Hyde will begin the conversation and presentation. If you're joining us, please keep your microphone on mute throughout the presentation. I now have someone calling here to probably get some help, but Leslie, I will leave it up to you.
Okay. 7 o'clock, do you think we should start? All right, I'm getting the go.
Yeah.
Hi, it is a pleasure to welcome you all to this community conversation, Coping with COVID. With the approach of winter, this is a good time to acknowledge our struggles and to chart personal and community intention and planning for self-care. I'm delighted to have you join us as we explore paths for coping and building resilience. I'm incredibly grateful that we are fortunate enough to have two superb speakers who I will introduce shortly.
If you want to hear it.
Leslie Hyde. I'm an ordained interfaith chaplain and I work with local law enforcement. I'm also a member of the Yarmouth Community Coronavirus Task Force. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we start. The best way to watch this is to adjust the view to who's talking, so you see that person. It's a drop-down option at the top center of your screen. I'm going to introduce Greg Marley shortly, who's going to make his presentation, and then I'll introduce Kate Braestrup, who will also share her thoughts. And while they're talking, if you could keep yourself on mute, we'd appreciate it because of background noise, but feel free
make yours out
to
loud if you can.
Questions in the chat function. And we will answer as many as possible as time allows. Okay, so I'm going to start. Greg Marley is a licensed clinical social worker. He is the clinical director for NAMI, which is the National Alliance on Mental Illness for Maine. Greg has practiced in the field of community mental health in Maine for over 25 years as a clinician, clinical supervisor, manager, and consultant. Since 2007, he has developed and presented training and education supporting the needs of a diverse set of statewide partners in suicide preventions and systems integration of prevention activities. Greg has presented across Maine and all of New England to a variety of audiences in topics like suicide prevention, substance abuse prevention, mental health. Since 2013, he has worked closely with schools, primary care practices, hospitals, and mental health programs to support the development of protocols and processes integrating suicide prevention and management. When not focused on mental health and suicide prevention, Greg can be found messing around in the world of mushrooms. So thank you, Greg, so much for offering your expertise, and the floor is now yours. Greg, you're on mute.
Thank you. Thank you, Leslie. I can never help but blush when someone introduces me, but I will work on getting over that. I'm going to share my screen. I thank everybody for coming out tonight, and do put your questions while we're talking into the chat so we can address those as we go or at the end, and we will move along from there. So I want to acknowledge I work for NAMI Maine as the clinical director and as the suicide prevention director, but I also do much of my work under the umbrella of the Maine Suicide Prevention Program, which funds much of the suicide prevention work that I do around the state. And I'm happy to work with them. They allow me to do good work across the state, really supporting a number of people. And if anybody for any reason cannot see my slides, please let me know now. But diving in, we are in a time where people have been using words like unprecedented, never seen before, challenging. And, we have been struggling to find, maintain, or seek balance since February. And balance has never been more challenging or elusive. And so that's kind of what we're going to be talking about, because it is the resilience we bring to or have in our lives that help us keep balance during trying times. So, and this is nothing if it not a trying and difficult time. Since January, we watched this viral plague cross the world and enter into a couple points in our country in February, and early March, it started to expand. And by mid-March, everything was shutting down. And it seemed so out of control. What was suddenly distant and almost unreal became very real as it overwhelmed our lives. And we're dealing with an invisible or all but invisible virus, but it does pose a threat to health. And our response as individuals, as families, as communities, as a country is what controls that threat. And right now, the US remains the country that has the highest number of cases, highest number of deaths of any across the world. And it's impacted everything. Finances, access to care, access to other services, as we quickly slid into isolation. And that isolation, it's physical distancing, but it's causing social isolation, disrupting our connections with almost everybody in our lives. And one of the things that I have found early on and continue to find most difficult about this COVID time and the pandemic is that almost no one agrees about everything. And many people seem to not find common ground about anything in terms of management. So it has become political. During a time when our politics are already radically divided, this is added to it. So what we need to first and continue to do is check in and acknowledge our emotional bodies. How are we feeling about this? And I post this marquee that was in Dover Foxcroft in the spring to kind of acknowledge this difficult time of transitions for their high school seniors. And they say, stay wicked far apart, and that's all they could add as a suggestion. Let us keep far apart. And that's what we've been doing, huh? And it's not fun or easy or always effective. So how is this crisis affecting you today, 2 months ago, 4 months ago, 6 months ago, and as we move ahead? It has impacted our physical health, weight. Are you one of those people who are carrying the COVID-19 around your midriffle? Sleeplessness? Have any of you been diagnosed with COVID or not? So it's all there, and all of that has come down on our emotional state and our mental health. And we'll talk some about depression and anxiety, increase in substance use disorders and eating disorders, and certainly a radical increase in domestic violence. And we've often been left with a feeling of hopelessness, that impact on our spiritual health, the meaning of all this. And it's led to a lot of kind of calamitous thinking. And have you been protected from the financial hits of people? There are some people who are doing okay. In fact, they're doing well because they're spending much less on theaters and bars and restaurants. But other people's have been struck like nothing else. And one of the things, through the spring, I was doing a lot of work with schools and healthcare professionals. And I saw people working to balance work and family like we haven't had to do ever. People who are trying to deliver professional services as school counselors or therapists or healthcare providers, and some of them working from home while they're caring for their school age or preschool age children and trying to address their educational needs and food needs and emotional needs. And they were stressed. The stress has been incredible. And all of that is added on to anybody who's a frontline professional: healthcare, law enforcement, firefighters, and a lot of the people whose work cannot stop during this period of time. And right now we laud them, we value them, and there's some, are they unsafe? Could they be infected? We have those discussions in my home. If I've been out and about in the world, what do I need to do when I get home? And my wife, who works in a healthcare setting, we think about those things. So fairly early on, I began to recognize that what we're dealing here is loss. Think of the 12th grade class last spring in late winter as they realized that their graduation was coming and maybe it wasn't going to be acknowledged. And the losses around that, the loss of finances, the loss of hope, the loss of people that we love to COVID, and the grief around all those things and all the other losses. 40 years ago or so, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross came up with these nifty little stages of grief. And some of them work really well, though not necessarily in any kind of sequence. But think about it. How many of the stages of grief have you been through and maybe back around and through again since March? Initially, always the shock. The shock that we cannot believe it's coming, we cannot believe it's here, and the denial. It's not going to be that serious. We don't have to shut down. Oh, it's going to pass quickly. Some people, as you know, seem like they've gotten stuck in that denial and the magical thinking that goes along with denial. But underneath that is the uncertainty, the pain, the insecurity, the distress, the heightened anxiety, and often anger. Some of us deal with any kind of disruption with a leading edge of anger, because anger keeps things at a distance. And some people we know have gotten stuck in anger and stuck in the bargaining. If I just do this, if we just open partially, all those kinds of bargaining around how we might manage this. And throughout this, people have settled into more depression and more anxiety. And I have seen in myself, in my family, in my coworkers, waves where acceptance comes, and as acceptance settles in, comes innovation. How do we change the way we work and how we deliver things that are still effective during this period of time? How do we reach out and connect with people and still stay safe in this time? Waves of acceptance, and then something else happens and things slide back down. What were the signs in your life as spring had turned into summer? What were the things that were canceled or put off that impacted you and slid you back down? So we've had these waves of acceptance and innovation. And now as we come into winter, we have to retool, figure out how we're going to do this to get through another year. That's cycling back again. So I urge you, how are you being intentional in terms of the coping strategies you put into place? And do you start with the strategies that have worked in other times? So we're practicing social distance to ensure that, or physical distance to ensure social distances. But how do we maintain a routine? Even if you're working from home, are you getting up early, showering? Many people early on seem to go for days in their sweatpants. And, how do you bring that sense of order so that you know that there are changes in the day? Work, exercise, many people have dove into house and garden projects. And how are you getting good sleep? I know that when I'm under stress, I know it in my sleep patterns. When I wake up in the middle of the night, and as I'm waking up, my mind is already working over the thing that I'm worried about, and I have trouble getting back to sleep. Sleep is a barometer, but it also is a healer, and it is what helps us maintain physical and mental health. And, many people have turned to cooking. Keep calm and keep cooking. Good food, lovingly cooked. It might add to that COVID-19 weight gain, but there has been a lot of food. How many people on this call tonight are working on your 30th or 40th batch of sourdough bread? You know, I'm one of those. And the other thing I've seen people turning to abundantly is the outdoors. And you can see that reflected in the lack of access of bicycles and bike parts and hiking boots and other outdoor gear. So walking, biking, hiking, swimming, foraging, exercise, the outdoors has been abundantly helpful. And also what I've seen is helpful, and I've used it in my life, is those mindfulness practices. Breath exercises, meditation, calming music, journaling, prayer. What is the mindfulness practice you put in place? And how are you adapting this now as we move into the darkness? We'll talk more about that in a minute. So how do we support mental wellness is the bottom line. Because depression and anxiety up probably at least 20% now, above a base rate that was already about 10%. And that isolation, the uncertainty, the fear, the lack of engagement of people around you are the drivers of that depression. The uncertainty of the world. And anxiety, if you already were struggling with or on the verge of anxiety, this has been on board. One coworker of mine who lives with high anxiety, we were maybe 3 weeks into the COVID shutdown, and she said, I don't know how much more of this I can take. I said, oh, you know, this is going to be a marathon, and it's getting to be a longer marathon. And I worry a lot about the older adults that live here in Maine. I worry because of their physical health vulnerability, and I worry about how the isolation is impacting them. How are you supporting the elders in your community? So let's talk about connection, and let's talk about what we can do. How do you use this time? I mean, the caption is, all right, great. Now do it blindfolded. Now do it with one hand tied behind your back, because that's where we are. How are you establishing and maintaining contact? Every one of us on this call have gotten good at using things like Zoom and GoToMeeting and Google Meets and FaceTime and all of those apps that we mostly ignored before. So, but we're using them. And some of the things I've heard that were just wonderful examples, you know, a couple of grandparents who say, you know, I can't see my grandchildren right now. It's just not safe. But every night we read a book together. We start at the same time. I have a copy of the book. They have a copy of the book. We read together. And so we have that time together. It gives their parents a little bit of a break. Other people are watching movies or playing games together, virtual book clubs. We started out early on doing virtual dinners with some friends of ours that we regularly got together with. And then later, we established this pergola that I built last year, fancied it up a little bit, and we've been meeting outside all summer. And we could do that with groups of 4 or 6, maybe larger on a good night when we could spread out into the lawn. So how do we adapt? Because this is a longer and longer marathon. So for us and for those we love or support, what are the red flags you have to watch out for? To me, it's always watch for the changes. That disrupted sleep, too much sleep, racing mind, unproductive worrying, the things you can't let go of, isolating, and this is isolating even within the social isolation we're going through right now, avoiding contact, pushing friends away, family away, uncontrolled emotionality, anger, tears, sadness, certainly. And that shift from where maybe I'm using substances a little more than I had, and suddenly it seems like substances are using me. Watch for that shift. And always stuck in blame, stuck in hopelessness are danger signs. And think about when those come, they are information. They're information that something needs to shift. And you don't need to be charged around it, but how do you address them? And think about what are your hacks, your Rube Goldberg innovations to get through this time? You know, beyond the Zoom dinners and the Zoom cooking, how many of you have dove into hobbies that you had left behind before. As Leslie mentioned in my introduction, I'm a nut about mushrooming. I'm passionate. And in the spring, I had all these classes I was lined up to teach through the summer and fall. Most of them got canceled. But I started doing things online, presentations, connections, and classes. And I had a great time because it allowed me also to dive in and do the research, which is the funnest part. How are you getting the necessities in your life? I know Amazon is thriving. I'm not sure I'm wild about that, but I've used them. Online shopping, Dawn shopping runs, and oh, the world of working from home. I love it and I hate it. I hate the isolation. I love the convenience. And for me, and for many people that I know, taking advantage of nature, whether it's gardening and projects in my own yard or out into the woods, it's a wonderful time for that. Backpacking and hiking has gone very busy. And what's a struggle, I find, and sometimes is my partner is also working at times out of the home. And like tonight, you know, we were having dueling Zoom meetings for a while. How do you do that in the same small house, social distancing and also both working? That's a challenge. And we don't even have any children still at home. And the growing, the baking, the foraging your own, those are all hacks. But what I want to focus on, how are you finding opportunities to give back, to give into your community, to give into your neighbors? My wife and I were diagnosed with COVID very early in April, and we'd already been isolated. We connected, you know, I told my work what was going on. We couldn't get a test, but I was diagnosed by our doctor. And we kind of hunkered down. I didn't tell anybody other than our health providers. And then I put a little blurb in a Facebook post about our cats, you know, enjoying our kittens while coping with COVID, that kind of thing. And suddenly people reached in and they wanted to bring over soup and food and flowers and chocolate, run our errands for us. And I realized after my initial hesitation about accepting that kind of generosity, I realized I was doing them a favor as well, because they could focus outside of themselves and they could give back. And I know I seek to find ways of doing that all the time. And I recognize how important it is in my life. So think about, what are the opportunities you have for giving back? Our friends Eileen and Jean were making masks. The mask I had on several slides ago was a mask about wild mushrooms that Jean Marshall made. So how are you doing that? It's vitally important, I think. And finally, you know, let's move in. What are the elements of resilience during this time? You know, resilience, you know, is that bouncy ball and the ability of it to bounce when placed under pressure. And that's, you know, that's what we do in the face of adversity and trauma, challenges. The resilience is what makes us swing back during those times. And it's about having access and choices to have access to options. And some of that is more challenging. But let's talk about what we can facilitate in your lives during this time. You know, always, I follow Maslow's hierarchy, those hierarchy that starts at the very basis. You know, how do you support people's access to food, shelter, heat, and after that, connection, love, support. And remember, sleep now is down on the very base of Maslow's hierarchy. So you start where the needs are. Always find a way to address isolation. Phone trees and virtual support groups. And remember, for the much older adults, some of them are not particularly facile with some of the electronic media. But teach them. You know, how many people have you taught to use Zoom or GoToMeeting or some of these other things? They're not that challenging once we get used to it, but the learning is important. Figure out how to do socialization safely. Figure out how you access the services you need. And it's particularly challenging right now for those who had work-based insurance and they've lost that. Can they get the expanded Maine care? Can they not? And also, when you need mental health treatment, how do you access that? And I know almost all of the mental health providers that work in private practice in this state have now gone to telehealth. So the accessing them are easier, particularly for people that are isolated, though it's a challenging venue to work with. I also know that almost all of them are full and have waiting lists, so it's maybe difficult to get in because of that. So, and also the last one thing I want to talk about is know when it's time to ask for and get help. Know when the weight on one side of the fulcrum is overbalancing you so much you can't get your feet on the ground. And what does help look like? You know, at times, know when to reach out to crisis. The statewide crisis hotline now accepts texts or chat or phone calls, and they can open up the door if someone needs mental health services. You know, community counselors, I've been a strong believer in therapy. I've used it several times in my life, and the joking thing we would do with our child growing up is says, you know, it's our job as parents to mess up just enough to where you have to get therapy at some point, because that's how you're going to grow. So think about how you do it. NAMI's resources are really excellent. One thing that we're just starting to roll out right now is a connection to mantherapy.org nationwide. We're bringing it to Maine with Maine Resources Connected. And it is a site for those more traditional men in your life, the ones who don't reach out for help, that don't easily acknowledge when their emotionality is hard, and struggle with services in that way. Man Therapy uses a light male masculine-based approach to invite people in to look at your mental wellness and to get the help you need. Check it out, mantherapy.org. We also have a lot of other support groups and education groups. But bottom line is, know who in your community, in the state, you can reach out and consult with for questions and concerns. So find help and reach out for it. This is how you connect with NAMI. And know that it's really important to stay in balance. And I'm going to leave this up right now and stop sharing. And we're going to let Leslie come on, and we will deal with questions after Kate does her piece. All right, so let's see, that should stop me sharing. Hi.
Yeah. Greg, thank you. I'm struck by the breadth of mental illness and how much you covered. And I can't wait for the questions afterwards because you brought up a lot of really rich material. I have the enormous good pleasure to introduce Kate Braestrup, who lives in Lincolnville with her husband, Simon Vandervan, and their collective 6 children. Kate is a graduate of Parsons School of Design as well as Bangor Theological Seminary. She is a community minister affiliated with First Universalist Church in Rockland and a New York Times best-selling author. She serves as the chaplain to the Maine Warden Service, joining game wardens as they search for those who have lost their way and comforting those waiting for loved ones to be rescued. She is a popular public speaker who has presented at TED Talks and NPR's Moth Radio. There is little doubt that she will bring her characteristic good humor, honesty, and insight to this conversation. It is with enormous good pleasure that I introduce Kate Braestrup.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, I'm not planning to bring my characteristic good humor today, just so you know. I actually want to, first of all, thank Greg, because I'm sitting here writing notes, as is my wont. And because he's given us such a great place to start from. I want to get a little bit down in the weeds, because I figured at the end of this this conversation, I'd like you to walk away with something you can do. And I tend to be very concrete. And so even though I'm a minister and a chaplain, and I'm, in theory, working with spiritual concerns, the spirit and the body are so closely connected. And all of the issues that are coming up in the time of COVID are actually large theological issues that all of us are working through and living through day to day. And if we see it that way, if we see ourselves as, in some sense, having been handed a spiritual challenge, then maybe it won't seem quite so obnoxious and unfair, because as spiritual challenges go, this one's a tough one, but they get tougher. And that at the end of, whenever the end of this arrives, I don't know how we're going to know when that is, but when the end of this arrives, we are going to have learned things, and we are going, all of us individually and as communities, are going to have grown from this. We're going to know things we didn't know before. We're going to be wiser than we were before. And that's already true. I know it's true from my own life and from everybody that I interact with. And I know it's true for you. Because that's really how we roll. Human beings, we know how to take adversity and turn it into wisdom. We know how to do that. It's not comfortable, but we know how to do it. So my first sort of useful, user-friendly tip that comes from my work as a chaplain is when in doubt, take care of your body. When in doubt, take care of the bodies of the people that you are attempting to help. This sounds maybe more obvious to some of you than it did to me when I first learned it, because I tend to live very much in my head, very much about, thinking and writing and all of this stuff. Turns out when you go into the woods with the game wardens, it's all about the body. It's all about finding people's bodies. It's all about keeping people warm. It's all about connecting people to the voices on the phone if necessary, but preferably the actual human beings who can touch their bodies and let them feel like they've really come home. And we do that with our body. We, even people like me who live in my head all the time, when it comes down to it, take care of my body and I will be at least 50% better than I was before. So one of the tricky things about this time is that quite a few of the things that we do to take care of each other's bodies, even in very incidental ways, we can't do them. And I'll give you a really basic example. You go to the grocery store to buy groceries. Every time someone smiles at you, they're taking care of you, right? When we all smile at each other, we're taking care of each other in a way. We're connecting. And we take in that sense data into our bodies. It does things to our brains, all that stuff. Well, guess what? Now we go to the grocery store and everybody's wearing a mask. And that's a real hit. That's a real deprivation that I think is worth taking seriously. We aren't allowed to hug each other anymore. And I am a seriously over huggy person, arguably boundary issue. So when not only can we not hug each other, but even when there's someone we can hug, we find ourselves sort of thinking, oh, am I allowed to hug you? My husband pointed out the other day that when he's watching a show on television, people touch each other or get close to each other. He kind of goes, what are they doing? Right? So, okay, this is not good. This is not a healthy thing for us, and we're stuck with it for now. Bound into that is if something bad happens to you. So, for example, many of us have had weddings we couldn't go to, events we couldn't go to. We couldn't be physically present with our loved ones when they were sick in the hospital. That actually is a major deprivation because your physical presence in the room of your sick parent or whatever, just being there, just the way you alter the weight in the room and the sound in the room and all of that is our brains have evolved to respond to that in positive ways, and that we've been deprived of. So this sounds like I'm just laying on more and more bad news, but I'm going to make this better, I think. So when I started thinking about this, and I realized how much it impacted my work as a chaplain, because even though I'm a very in my head person, when I show up to be with someone who's in a crisis of some kind, often all I'm doing is taking care of their body, and that's a very physical thing. And now I can't do that. So all of us have had to learn how to make up for that. So we know this already. You're already doing it. So I'm not telling you anything that you weren't already doing. All I'm saying is to think about it in a slightly different way, because if we do it consciously and we think, oh, okay, this is what I'm doing, we can actually do it more and maybe more efficiently and better, and consciously be learning it, so that when this crisis is passed, but we have the next one, we'll go, oh, I know how to handle this. I've done this. Right? So principle number one, when in doubt, take care of the body however you can. So if it has to be, if food can only go remotely, we're going to do remote food. Something is better than nothing. That's principle two. And that means if all you can do is send a text, send a text. Right? And if you have a friend who you know is lonely and you're like, okay, I can't, I have too much going on, I can't, okay, great, send a text, make a phone call. Something is better than nothing. And my third offering principle is that if you can expand the kind of bandwidth as far as sense data that's coming in. So if you think about it in terms of like what we're doing right now, you can hear my voice and you can see me kind of this blurry, dark, weirdly elderly person on the screen. And seriously, we need a new makeup person, Leslie. Seriously. But okay, so we have visual and we have auditory, essentially. And okay, that's great. Anything that you can do that expands that out. So text messages are great. A lot of folks have discovered that if you go back to writing letters and postcards, it means that that person, the recipient, is getting your handwriting, which for many of us, if it's someone you know and love, you know their handwriting, right? So you're getting their handwriting. You're getting a physical object that you can hold in your hands. You're getting the picture on the postcard or the, whatever it is. In other words, it's an expanded sensory experience. And we already know how to do this, so we can expand out the sensory experience. Any way you can think of to do that it is great. And then the last one is, before I get to that, also memory. So I know that when I hear my mother's voice not only is the sound of her voice, it's also the memory of her voice. It's the memory of all of the stuff that we've ever done together. And it's the memory of her physical presence. And all of that gets pulled up the instant she says, hi, honey bunny. Okay. So once you know that if you can access memory together by telling a story, by consciously using, you remember the time when such and such happened, you're actually recreating in the body of the recipient of this story or memory, or even just like little phrases or jokes, you're actually recreating the experience a little bit in their bodies. So you're taking care of their bodies in a slightly different way and in a more expanded way than you would otherwise. Again, you're doing this already. You're doing it instinctively. All I'm saying is you can make it conscious. And that brings me to ritual. One of the things that we've lost, those of us who go to church, we've lost that often. Going to church online is not the same thing. However, to the extent that your church services recreate the ritual, ritual gives us predictability. Remember, Greg just said this pandemic was unpredictable. It's still unpredictable. We don't know whether we might be exposed, we might not be exposed. If I've been exposed, do I have to isolate for all of that stuff? Ritual is predictable, which is one reason we like it. And you have probably already started creating. There's probably already a ritual that you do, and it can be something really small. How do you say hello to somebody when they come to a meeting, when they arrive at one of our Zoom meetings? How do you sign off of the Zoom meeting? When you're done reading your grandchild the book, how do you say goodbye? So if you make that conscious, and this can be very transparent, there's nothing secret squirrel about it. If you make it conscious, you decide, how would I like that ritual to go? And you come up with a ritual together between you and your grandchildren, or you and your coworkers, or whatever it is, that you can actually be taking care of each other's bodies virtually by using what we already know, which is ritual, memory, So I'm going to bring you to my last one, my last little tip, because I don't want to overload it. What they have found, neurologists, not people like me, but neurologists have found, is essentially that empathy is a neurological phenomenon, and you've probably read about this. So essentially, it means that when we witness somebody who's in pain, the parts of our brains light up that would light up if we were in pain. So that's empathy on a neurological level. This ability means that what they found was if they had a bunch of guys at a meeting, people at a meeting, and at a Zoom meeting, and everybody on every little screen, little Brady Bunch screen, would happen to be holding a cup of Dunkin' Donuts coffee, right? Recognizable logo, everybody knows what the logo looks like, okay. And they all happen to be drinking this coffee, that the meeting went better and that their bodies were calmer than they would have been, than they seemed to be otherwise. And so what they realized is that if somebody on the screen is doing something, you and the person on the screen are doing the same thing in some way. You're both having the same sensory experience. So you both have the weight of the coffee cup, you have the smell of the coffee, you have the heat, all of that. You have a shared experience. Your body perceives that as if you were in the same room or as if you were together in some more concrete way. So I read that, read about this study and thought, awesome, let's use this, right? So when you're talking to your grandchild on the phone and you're using your little Zoom thing, every single time there can be bottle of water, right? And the bottle of water becomes ritual. The bottle of water is actually good for you. Drink a lot of water when you're under stress. It's a good thing, especially if you're grieving, because you got to make tears, right? The bottle of water shows up every single time. Then all you have to do, all that has to happen is that you and your grandchild see the bottle of water. You're both drinking water, and you actually have a more connected experience than you otherwise would. That you have more of a sense of physical connection than you otherwise would. So those are my bits. When in doubt, take care of the body however you can. And yes, I have, sent through the mail food, bubble bath to my kids when I can't go see them. That's what I'm talking about. You've done it, we've done it. And just when in doubt, that's a good thing. Something is better than nothing. So touching base with a neighbor, even if you can't go over and visit the neighbor, just checking in with the neighbor, dropping something off for the neighbor is better than nothing. And expand the sense data to the extent that you can. Use ritual, and I'm talking little itty bitty rituals. You're already doing that, so just making it conscious. I'll give you an example. So my sister and I grew up in the same household. We both have things that we do for Christmas. Then we had our own children and we did Christmas with our own children. Well, one year my children and I went to my sister's house for Christmas. And on the way home, my children were absolutely outraged. Their cousins and their aunt and uncle did Christmas wrong, right? And all it was things like, they open their stockings before they do the rest of the presents instead of after the rest of the presents. Whatever it is, all these little things. Children are really good at creating tradition and creating ritual because they insist on it. You have to do it in the right way. So that's all I'm talking about. Nothing big and dramatic, just that kind of ritual that creates that sense of connection and kinship, and in a physiological way that allows our bodies to feel. Consciously harnessing memory. So bringing up, you remember when this happened, or making sure you're including a memory in a conversation, and using your brain's ability to empathize consciously by creating joint experiences, whole body experiences, even if you can't be in the same room together. And I'll wrap up that with one option for a ritual, which is, this is going to sound a little weird, but law enforcement officers learn to do a form of yoga, breathing. It's a breathing thing at the academy, and it's called box breathing. So when I realized, that okay, here's this one thing that I can do. And it's kind of like drinking the water, right? It's good for people in itself. You use it to calm your body. It's a breathing exercise you use to calm your body. Super simple. You breathe in for 4, hold for 4, breathe out for 4, hold for 4, breathe in for, that's why it's called box, right? Very, very easy. They all learned it because it's how you calm your heart rate when you're doing defensive tactics or shooting or things like that. So they already have it. And so what I suggested to them was, you can use this for anything. You can use it when you're in the middle of a fight with your spouse. I mean, we're trying to forestall that domestic violence thing Greg was talking about, right? So but anything like any breathing exercise that you have combines ritual, actual calming of the body, doing something together physically, which allows you to feel with whoever it is, your grandchild, let's say. So you could do box breathing if you have some other yoga breathing, or you have prayer, especially if your prayer involves a physical manifestation. So a position, something that involves your whole body and their whole body. Remember, maximum sensory input. Yeah, so use that, think about that consciously, think about what you're already doing, and then just build on that. And the great thing about this is, I think, is that when, again, we're all learning things that we didn't have before. We have capabilities we didn't have before. I do already, I'm one of those elderly people that's terrible at Zoom meetings and all that stuff. I'm always the one who screws them up. I'm way better at it now than I was before. So that's going to be true for you. And the more consciously we can go through this, the more we will get out of it. One of my personal mantras is never waste pain. And what I mean is we get the pain anyway, so we might as well extract the maximum amount of wisdom that we can from it. So that's all I'm talking about. We're stuck with COVID. We're stuck with this crazy political environment. We're stuck with all of it. Great, let's not waste it. Let's extract as much wisdom from it as we can.
Are you done?
I'm done, because I want to have time for questions.
I hate taking the screen back from Kate. There are some questions and we're going to get to them, but what I find so fascinating, what I heard, there's so much. We could do this every night for the next month and not cover everything that we have. It's so deep. But what I hear both Greg and Kate talking about is the intentionality of being aware of where we are, of accepting. You know, Greg talked about the 5 stages of grief and how they aren't linear, and how you bounce back and forth, and how exhausting it is. And I think one of the great benefits of tonight is for us to just take stock about how hard this is, and then implement so many of these sort of great ideas about how to take care of ourselves. And I have to say, for me, I love that something is better than nothing, because my daughter is on this call and she's going to hate that I mentioned that, but she knows how much of a perfectionist I am. And something is better than nothing is such a great single piece to hold on to, because it doesn't have to be perfect. You just have to do it. And in the doing it, the advocacy of that, in the energy of that, you're already starting some healing. But there are a couple of questions. Greg, you said something, and this is a question from me. You talked about being stuck in blame. And I didn't, other people are probably smarter than I am. I didn't know what you meant by that. And I wanted to ask you a little bit more about what that phrase meant.
It's that always looking, I call it that external locus of control, for something outside of me that is causing this issue, this pain, this discomfort, and focusing my energy against that rather than trying to come up with innovations on how to adapt. So we blame the fake news, we blame whatever it happens to be, the Chinese, that this is a China virus, whatever it happens to be. I blame somebody else for my own tripping. If I can't figure out how to negotiate the GoToMeeting screen, I'm going to blame the person who set up the meeting. It's that stuck in that, using that as my only kind of way of addressing something, or the predominant.
Thank you. I didn't get that. And it's such a great reminder because it's so easy. And again, I'm going to make this personal to me because I've made
Everything is.
it's so easy to want to look for somebody to blame when you're angry or upset. And as Kate and you both said, this is a real opportunity for growth in ourselves. And we're not going to do that when we're busy pointing the finger at somebody else. We're going to do that when we say, okay, what's my part of this and what can I do? And I will say, Kate said something when you're talking about the auditory and expanding and the writing. I want to give a shout out to Lee Kirshner because we have a program here that I hope other communities adopt where we have people writing older people in homes that they don't know. And it's such a wonderful way.
Writing them letters.
Yeah, exactly. And you don't, and we're even trying to do it with phone pals, but first of all, you're doing something for somebody who's not you, which is the best way to feel better that I can think of. And second of all, you're actually doing just what you talked about, expanding your senses and bringing joy to somebody else. So I just thought that was a neat idea. And I wanted to ask both of you, Halloween, but more Thanksgiving is talk about ritual and connection and sharing food. This is a tough one. And it's looming, and I would love both of you to give us your best thoughts about how to address that.
Why don't I dive in first, and you can pick up where I leave off, Kate. I'm a cook, and in my house, we traditionally host Thanksgiving meals. And we have a small house, 1,100 square feet, but we might have 16 people. Valley, my partner, she focuses on the beauty of the setting. And so both of those are something we give. And so for me, I'm thinking, I can't do this with 16 people this year. We may do it with 4, but that's going to be kind of it in our bubble. But I'm thinking, there's some things that I make that kind of embody Thanksgiving love for me in giving that love. And can I teach someone how to make that? Because I never write it down. I just wing it. That's my style of cooking. But I could teach that, and to give it on, they can make it for themselves. So that's just one idea. How do we connect and give? Because oftentimes Thanksgiving is not that 3 hours of eating and the walk afterwards and then dessert, so 5 hours. But it's the day of cooking, or the 2 days of cooking, the day of presenting, and then the day after with the leftovers, so that teaching could be over several days. But that's just one idea I have because I'm a cook. Kate, what do you think?
Well, a couple of things. One is I'm not a cook, so luckily I'm married to one.
Yeah, Valley says the same thing.
It's awesome. Yeah, I'll clean up, but yeah. I have noticed that when it's come to other rituals, so weddings in particular, funerals also. I lost my mom this summer, which is why I had to mention her voice. But and funerals, that our rituals have been seriously abbreviated, if not, excluded altogether. So what I found is that limitation often intensifies or even creates meaning. So with the weddings that have taken place, that I've either performed the wedding or been to the wedding as one of a very limited number of guests, what I find is that it's focused and condensed and distilled for the couple. What is the most important thing about this? Or if they can only have X, whatever it is. Okay, we have to be outside, mom can't be there, but okay, we can have this prayer, that the meaning and the intensity of the experience can actually be amplified. You're so much more aware of it because it's weird, because it's odd, because it's different. And that isn't always going to be true. So believe it or not, and those of you who have loved ones who went through, say, World War II or went through the Depression or something like that, you can sometimes be sort of startled by how they'll share a story and the story's actually like good. That the intensity of the experience, even though the experience was terrible, actually created a memory that was powerful and resonant. And there may be a time, in fact, I can guarantee there'll be a time when Greg looks back at Thanksgiving 2020 as like, that was really kind of an amazing thing. That doesn't mean we want to always do it. We certainly don't want to always do it for this reason, but it may be that if we think about it that way and we think about it consciously, like this is the one chance we get to do life in this way. And again, to extract as much from it as we can, rather than kind of focusing on the limitation part of it, see, okay, what are we making happen here that wasn't happening before? Yeah. So now you may very well, and I would be okay with this, you may come through it going, that just sucked. And I don't blame you, right? I really don't. I mean, my mother's funeral was very much my mother. There are people who are being deprived of what are very meaningful and important once in a lifetime events by this. So I'm not going to be Pollyanna-ish about it and pretend that everything's going to be great. We learn a lot from when things are really bad. And if nothing else, when next time, let's imagine that in 2021, Thanksgiving can be normal again. Wouldn't that be great? At the very least, it's possible that we'll sit down to Thanksgiving going, this is so great, right? Because it's normal and we won't take it for granted. So there's getting through now, and then there's knowing that, okay, there will come a point when we can look back and maybe this will actually be a good memory and we'll have learned stuff and we'll be even more grateful for the normal, ordinary, take for granted thing that we get to have.
I mean, there's even a word for that. I did earlier today, I did a lecture Zoom for a deaf and dying class, and I was talking about post-traumatic growth.
Yeah.
That which we've come through the hard times, and there's something that we've learned and we've been strengthened. And I want to jump right from there to acknowledge the statement that Lee Kirchner said in the chat, that she says, I actually think that many seniors are more resilient than younger people because they've been through hard times and they can put it into perspective. Yeah. Lee, I so appreciate you putting that in the chat box. We've been there, done that, lived through it. Yeah. Have the scars.
The question about guilt.
Oh,
Let's
right.
do that one.
Okay.
That was a good question.
Yeah, and actually the one that Erica asked, you guys almost talked about just now. But another question we got was about people who feel guilty because they are not struggling as much as other people. And what do you do? What do those people do? What's your advice for those people who just aren't suffering as much?
Easy peasy. How do you give back? Give from abundance. There's such a, there's such a need out there. There are so many opportunities. How do you give your energy, your love, your money, whatever it happens to be, you find abundance. Easy peasy.
Yeah, well, easy peasy. Although speaking as someone who who feels guilty pretty much all the time.
Former Catholic, I know guilt.
There you go. I've never been a Catholic, but I probably should have been one.
I was an altar boy even.
Yeah. So I don't know where I got it from, but I feel guilty all the time about everything. Yes. So
you're a chaplain, of course you do.
So but what I will say is that this has actually come up quite a few times. So once it was one of the guys I work with who said, first of all, he works for the Maine Warden Service, so government state job, the paycheck keeps coming, right? We're lucky that way. Anybody who works in a position where the paycheck keeps coming, we are really lucky right there. He said his family was stuck at home. His teenage sons, who ordinarily would be out and about and gone the way teenage sons go, were stuck at home. And there was obviously some frictions around this, but he and his wife would go to church on the sofa in front of the computer once a week. And the boys, because the boys were actually bored and there wasn't a whole lot else to do, started coming to church, which they hadn't done for a while. So all 5 of them, members of this family, would sit every Sunday on the couch. This is an 16, 18, and 19-year-old sons are sitting there on the couch with mom and dad going to Zoom church every Sunday. He said, we will never forget this. He felt guilty. He felt like here we are. And what I said to him was, like, the world is full of suffering. And the 4 noble truths of the Buddha, the first one is, you're gonna suffer. If this one isn't yours, then great. Take the blessing, soak it up, because yours is coming. I mean, that's just how it is. We all stupidly love people who are mortal. So all of us are looking at that. Soak this up, because this one isn't yours. And that means that we can take care of somebody. We can give to someone for whom this is theirs. This one's hitting them. And for some people, it's a huge hit. So yeah, I mean, I'm with Greg, but I'm very sympathetic with the guilt thing. Like, because I, you know, and I've talked to people who've been like, this has actually been great. It's been kind of like a snow day. I mean, like, you know, okay, good. Soak it up, enjoy it, roll around in it, wallow in it, and then take that, because you're not exhausted, you're not miserable, you're not terrified of what's coming next, and make something good happen for someone.
Okay, I'm looking at you still.
That's okay.
Okay, I have 2 more questions that have come in that I just wanted to get to. One is, do you guys have any suggestions for encouraging messages or even marketing campaigns that we can share with our communities to get us, you know, we're looking at winter and shorter days and darker times, and it's sort of a season of grief anyway. How do we, you know, what are the messages that we can give us some campaign ideas to get us through this together?
You're starting with me.
Well,
Yeah.
I'll let you fight it out. So high tech.
Well, I think it'll help actually when the election's over, because a lot of those messages are just, by definition, they're negative. Even if they don't intend to be, by definition, they're negative. So that will help, and then we can go back to, hopefully, we can go back to, and in fact, actually, let me take the opportunity to say, not hopefully, and maybe we'll go back, let's go back. Let's make a commitment to, once the yard signs are down and we're kind of done with that, okay, now let's start being with each other and consciously seeking each other out and taking care of each other. And that includes verbally. It includes how we talk on Facebook. I'm not on Facebook, but I think there's a lot of kind of toxicity on Facebook that circles around politics that I would recommend not doing. Because even if for you it feels okay, for somebody else it's going to feel awful or too much, or even if they agree with you, that isn't really where we want to be. I think looking, and I think it encourages what Greg was talking about in terms of finding the locus of control outside of yourself, rather than really thinking about who can I be for you and who are you to me in a more intimate sense. And this is, again, it's an opportunity to create community, and to create community means you accept and tolerate real difference. The kind of difference that you don't actually want to accept and tolerate. Those are the ones we're supposed to accept and tolerate. So I think my answer to that would be, let's work really hard on that. Okay, maybe we have to give ourselves until after November 3rd. But
20th.
Yeah. No, let's make the deadline. The deadline is election day. You get till election day to be weird and snarky with people, but then after that, we have to be neighbors first.
Yeah.
And whatever our messages are, they should always be around that. That would be my answer to that.
And to mine is to choose to make conscious choices that are supporting positivity, whether it's positive, once a day, once, 3 times a week, I'm going to get out, even in the worst of weather, and take a walk. Or I'm going to create one room in my house that has a lot of light and a lot of brightness in its color and its furnishings, and that is going to be my place of brightness. And from there, I'm going to share that out. So think about what you can do that kind of brings that lightness beyond you. And I know one of the things I chose starting about, really descended to me in May, is how do I choose what I read and choose what I limit to read or watch? So we can dive down the rabbit hole of some of the divisive political dialogue, the dark movies, or we can choose something more uplifting. I know when I deal with some very, very weighty situations, and I have a group of music that I turn to, just like the square breathing that Kate talked about, that brings me back into myself in a hopeful, positive note. So what are those little pieces we can do for ourselves that energize us to give back?
Right.
Super.
I actually, Greg, I agree with you. I think finding joy, intentionally, deliberately seeking to find joy, even in a small space every day, is a huge antidote to anxiety and grief. And I have to tell you guys this because I read it on Facebook. I'm going to get it wrong, but somebody put up a meme about anxiety, and they said anxiety is exactly like your toddler. It's always screaming at you and never shuts up. It always tells you you're wrong, and it wakes you up at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, I thought that was my cat.
But I have to say that sort of speaking about joy and finding things, we got a question that I really liked, which is when we look back at this time, and Kate talked about Thanksgiving 2021 and looking back, and Erica even said, some 10-year-old said, they're never going to be, they're never going to complain about going to school again. Yeah. And I love those little pieces of sort of growth through transformation. And somebody asked, when we look back at this time, what do you expect we will say has changed our future?
Ooh, Eliza Jane Adams, hello to you. Boy, if I had that, do you have that crystal ball?
Yeah, no.
I'm thinking, I think it's got to be about connection and the importance of connection and the coming back to smaller things,
Yeah.
to more simplicity, whether that's growing our own gardens, cooking and preserving our own food, baking our own bread. It's those little things that give back and require intentional time. That's what I'm hoping it'll be. But I'm an optimist.
Yeah, no, again, I think, good things are already coming out of this in a lot of ways. They're not comfortable, but they're not bad. I know that there are a lot of people who have discovered and a lot of companies have discovered that there are a lot of workers who really can work from home. And that's really changing things. And at least on individual levels, it's already changing things for the better. I mean, it's in my family, I've got family members who now, are home and don't go to, and used to live in big cities, and now they can live in Maine because they can. And that is going to be, that's true really all over the country. A lot of folks are finding out, I don't actually have to do this, which is going to change all kinds of things, traffic patterns, and that's going to open up new possibilities. I mean, that's how human beings are, is we always can open up new possibilities. I think the interesting thing will be what we remember and hold on to, and that's going to be fascinating to watch. Just really funny little things like. There's a sort of the way that we use technology that got accelerated really quickly. And we went from, theoretically we could all be meeting, on Zoom, but we kind of habitually didn't. Well, now we know how to do that. We really could be doing that. And hey, you know what? Maybe the next big environmental conference in Davos can happen via Zoom. It doesn't have to be everybody flying in there on a jet, right? So that will be good. I think that the tricky part will be not reverting. And the tricky part is also, we don't know if we're done yet. So I don't know how many of you caught the murder hornets thing. like 2020 is not over. So, and the earth is a complicated place to live. And I would like to think that some of our ideas about and ways of treating each other in some ways are the product of a complacency about how safe we are in the world. And this could serve as a little sort of wake up call, like we're not done with germs yet. This pandemic may not be the big one. This actually may be the small one. Pandemics get worse. Germs get worse than this one, believe it or not. And so I would hope that we sort of take the lessons that are, as Leslie and I were just talking about this, but sometimes I'll say in a personal level, like, okay, God is tapping you on the shoulder with a chopstick. Are you going to listen to the chopstick, or are you going to wait for the 2x4 or the sledgehammer? Right? I mean, are you going to get it on this one, or we have to do this again? So it isn't that the sledgehammer doesn't come. It's that if you've paid attention to the lesson that's at this level, we're ready for the next lesson, whatever it is. So that's what I mean about extracting maximum value from this. I think that a lot of people definitely on the local level are doing it. Definitely here in Maine are doing it. There are temptations to not do it. There are temptations to push away the chopstick and wait for the 2x4. But you've already signed into this, so that's not going to be you guys, however many you are on the screen. So I have a lot of optimism about what you are going to do about this.
And I like the notes that says an appreciation of frontline workers and teachers and less consumption. For things we may learn through this time, which would be wonderful.
Yeah, except for the restaurants.
Right.
As soon as it opens back up, we're going out and consuming at restaurants like a lot. Yeah.
But haven't you guys, as you were talking and Sharon said something about less consumption, I'm astonished at how much I don't need, how much I don't buy, how much I just sort of did it to do it and I don't need it. And I'm really, really happy about that. And wasn't aware it was such a bad habit. And so that's something I hope, I love Kate's point that what are we going to remember to bring forward? You know, and that was a great question. And we've talked a lot about technology and Zoom. And I know my daughter sent me a really good article a while ago about Zoom fatigue, which is a very real thing. Right, I see Greg's face. Okay, so somebody asked turn it around and said, what habits might we include on Zoom to add the personal touch and connection? Like Greg, you talking about teaching somebody how to cook a meal at Thanksgiving. I love that. So what other habits are there that can make Zoom less Zoomy?
Yeah.
Which is a term.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And that's what I was touching on when I said, you know, expand out the sensory data that all the participants in the Zoom meeting or whatever it is are receiving. And that can be done very consciously and very transparently. You can say to your work group, whoever it is that you have to work with, okay, this is why we're going to do this, because we actually want to harness our brain's ability to create multi-sensory experience out of two-dimensional experience. Everybody, every Zoom meeting, bring your bottle of water, bring your cup of tea, whatever it is, and we're all going to drink tea and we're all going to do some other thing together. And that can be putting your feet flat on the floor, relax your body, and say hello. I mean, it can be something super simple. We're not adding 20 minutes onto every meeting. In fact, you don't want to do that because of Zoom fatigue. All we're doing is consciously expanding it out and then doing the same thing with some kind of closing ritual. And again, ritual makes it sound like I'm doing some new agey thing, and it doesn't have to be that. It doesn't have to be even though I'm a minister, so right. There's problems and nails. I'm a hammer, but ritual is good for it. That's why religion has it, is because we're actually, it's good for us. So it doesn't matter what the ritual is, except that obviously everybody has to be okay with it.
That's good from Mary Stewart.
And I'm thinking that I
yes.
was think
Read
about
that
it
one. Yeah.
in smaller pieces,
Yeah.
outside of the Zoom, but in my personal life, in my social life, what is the size of the meeting that works, that can allow people to connect with each other rather than getting lost? Because we're a mix of extroverts and introverts, people who will push forward and people who will lay back. So how do we set that up? Even when we were having dinner with 2 other couples, we realized we didn't want 6 computers, but we wanted each couple on 1 computer because it made it simpler and it made it closer and we could connect.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's the key, is connection.
It's interesting you say that because Kate and I decided consciously to share a computer rather than to each be on our own computer. And it's a little awkward who's on first and what's, right, makes people sick as we whip around. It's like when my grandson has the phone and is FaceTiming.
Yeah.
But it felt more connected. It felt like a very, here, wait, I've got, this is like elections. I've got something. Oh yeah, I saw this. This was a really good, there's so many good questions. Thank you everybody for these questions. They are amazing. I want to do this like 12 more times, but this question is, do you have any big dreams or wishes for ways to grieve the 215,000 lives lost? Do you think culturally we have any closure, or how do we process this much death? I mean, you say a number like 215,000, it has no meaning. And I don't mean that I misspoke, but it's so big that you can't get your arms around it. So I'd love for you guys to talk about that a little bit.
And that's my first reaction when I read that. How do I encompass 200,000+ people? But for me, it's who are the ones I know, who are the ones in Maine, who are the ones I can relate to, who are the ones that touch me, and start there and work out. I can't work in that big a canvas and feel like it's meaningful. That for me, Kate talks about rituals. Rituals are something I can wrap my hands around, not try and hug a tree that's too big.
Yeah. No, and I was probably going to come up with the same thing, which is it's a little tough because we aren't done yet, and we may not be done for a while. So one of the difficulties of this, it's kind of like with a war or something like that, is that here are 215,000 people, or 215, and then you add 1, so now it's 200, right? That obviously most of whom we don't know. I think starting smaller, it makes a lot of sense. We don't know yet we don't know the number we're going to be grieving yet. We're not done. And in some ways, we may not be done for a while, but there may come a point, as with the war, there may come a point when we go, okay, this is substantially over, and now we can do the processing of it. It's very difficult to hold a funeral, if, so to speak, a giant funeral, if we don't actually know the numbers. Yeah. And I remember that after 9/11, sort of, there was this impulse to, like, we have to memorialize, and we hadn't counted the dead yet. We don't know what we're looking at yet. So I would say, to begin with, we have 2 things, and there was another question that had come up that I think is a really big one, which is we also have people who are in the hospital or dying in a nursing home, and we can't even be with them. And we have to do that by Zoom. What I can say is, if that isn't you, If you get to be with your loved one when your loved one is sick or dying, because I got to be with my mother, I was extremely aware of how lucky we were. So just, it's going to sound weird, but you're sitting with your dying loved one. You get to sit with your dying loved one. That is a huge thing. So what I will say is that doctors, nurses, first responders are trying to pinch hit for you. And even chaplains can't go in. I mean, they're limiting it, which means it's putting a huge burden on nurses. My daughter is a nurse, so I hear about this. But they're stepping up, and they are being our proxies in the intensive care unit as people are dying. And so I think, weirdly, supporting, really paying a lot of attention to our frontline nurses, EMTs, those folks, not just because what they do is hard and they're exposing themselves to danger and all that stuff, but because literally they're our proxy. They're the ones going in for us and having to represent us to kind of carry in the love that would normally be coming in with a family member. They have to carry that in and substitute. And that is, they are being emotionally drained, and they're doing it for us. So that isn't really an answer to the question, because I'm not sure I have one. Maybe Greg does, but I will say that pouring into them, to that group, is probably the best way that strangers have, at least, of supporting families whose loved ones are in the hospital, is making sure that there's as much emotional energy getting poured into those nurses and doctors as possible.
In the same way that I can intellectually encompass, but I can't embrace 200,000, 215,000 people who died this year in this country from COVID, or 6 million Jews who perished in Europe, I can encompass them through the stories of the individuals. When I hear my friend Ken talking about his grandparents who died in Europe during World War II, and those family connections and the stories of them and what they meant, and the stories I hear on NPR about individuals who have passed during this COVID pandemic and who they were in life, then I can start to embrace and really appreciate and acknowledge that. I can't do it with 215,000.
I think, and one of the things that's tough about that is that it's letting your heart break. And
over and over.
And that's hard to do. It is. I am a hammer, and so this is a nail. One of the things that I often will tell people is, whatever your religious or theological view is, prayer is what we do when we don't have anything else. So, and it is remarkably effective. And I don't mean it's effective in the sense that if I say a prayer for the ICU nurses at Maine Med, the ICU nurse in Maine Med suddenly goes, ding, hey, I've been prayed for. I don't mean that. I mean that when I say a prayer for the nurses at Maine Med, I actually feel stronger, better, more connected. And I often think, once I've done the prayer, it often clears out that sense of anxiety and helplessness. And I almost always, after I've done saying my prayer, and it could be a really simple thing. I mean, I pray every time I hear a siren, right? Yeah, it's the siren prayer. Almost every single time, I then think of something else I could do that would be useful to someone, some little thing I could do that would be useful, more useful than whatever my prayer was. So for all I know, I'm, every time I pray for somebody because I hear a siren, miracles are happening. I kind of doubt it. I'd love to think so, but I know that one little miracle happens, which is that I become a more effective and loving person. And that's if enough of us are doing that, that's better. That's good. We're extracting something from the suffering and the grief. We're not wasting the pain.
I just wanted to you know, and Greg, feel free to jump in on this, and we're getting close to the end of our time, but something Kate said, first as a chaplain, I agree with all of that about prayer, but people who are suffering and people who are anxious and people who are depressed, if they do something for someone else, and which is exactly what prayer is, but it can be writing a letter, it can be making a phone call, it can be, as you said earlier, do whatever you can. That immediately, that agency immediately makes you feel better. You stop thinking about where you are and you start thinking about somebody else. And you know, I'd love to end in a sort of massive kumbaya moment, and I know we can't, 'cause this is way too big, but I do deeply and profoundly believe that the way we will get to the other side of this is with each other. And that when the new normal that comes out of this gets addressed, our best and highest selves are going to be the ones that will build that world for us. And that is the hope and the vision that I have, that when it's 2:00 in the morning and the demons are dancing, because that's when they tend to rock out, that's what I think about. And I would, because we've got about 5 more minutes, I'd like both of you to, you know, wrap up with something like that, and then we'll do our final thank yous.
I'm going to tell a story. On Monday, I did a similar coping with COVID and some prevention work with a group of vocational rehab specialists, mostly vision rehab specialists working with the blind and visually disabled. And one of the people I got to the point where I said, so what can you do? How can you give back? And she raised her hand virtually and she said, you know, when we've been working from home and I've really struggled with feeling effective, and how can I give back? And I realized I had the sewing machine. I have never unpacked it. I've never learned how to use it. And during this time, I said, I don't know how to sew, but I can put it together. And I realized, I said, there's YouTube.
Yeah.
And you can learn anything on YouTube. And I've learned plumbing and electrical work on YouTube, built my house. But she said, and so I went to YouTube and I said, you know, how do you build a mask? How do you sew masks? And she said, I learned it. And then I started sewing them for my family and for my neighbors and for the people who are at the counter down at Hannaford's. And now I have people that are looking ahead and saying, so what are the patterns you have for Christmas? What are you doing for Thanksgiving? And she says, and you could see her whole face light up, because this was something outside of the very meaningful work she does that she could do and feel meaningful about. And I think that's the opportunity we look for during this winter of darkness.
Yeah, love that. Love that. Yeah, somebody put a question in about, or not a question, but a comment about knitting together.
Mm.
I'm a big knitter too, and for me, if you're knitting together and you're showing each other your projects and all that, that's exactly the kind of thing I'm talking about. That's a multi-sensory, shared, harnessing the, you know, the empathy in the brain to feel like you've done something together. It's absolutely perfect. I think I'll maybe double down a little bit on prayer, because what you said was so perfect. I really do recommend it. I personally am not going to tell you who you have to pray to or where you, and all it has to be is it's very, very simple. And the serenity prayer is perfect. You know, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Perfect. So it doesn't, you don't even have to make up a new one. You can just use one of the old ones. And be patient and be kind with yourself and recognize the ways that you've already learned to master this. You're already doing this. If you had looked, you know, if you could look ahead, if we were all sitting around in February, there would be all kinds of things that we wouldn't know how to do. We would never have had experience of, strengths that we didn't know we have. And we would be pretty impressed with ourselves. I don't know if we will be in retrospect, because we're harder on ourselves in retrospect, but every now and then, just take stock of the things that we have done, that we have managed to do and make happen, and know that, own that, and you're not wasting this. So it's really nice getting to talk to you guys, because here you are. So you've already demonstrated by clicking onto the little screen that you're already not wasting this time. So you got this.
That is a perfect place to stop. I do have to say, I just did a peace candle on Sunday, and one of the things I said is my favorite advice as a chaplain is be relentlessly kind to yourself, because we're much kinder to other people than we are to ourselves. And if we could be our own best friends, that will make this winter a lot easier. It is 8:30, which, God, that went by fast.
Yeah, it was great.
I just cannot even begin to express my gratitude to Greg and Kate for an evening that is just as astonishing as I knew it would be. You two are remarkable. And I do want to say this has been recorded. I'm going to listen to it again, because there's so much that was said here that it's worth listening to. And it's going to be available on the Yarmouth Community Coronavirus Task Force Facebook page. I know, thank you. It's going to be on the Yarmouth Cares About Neighbors and the Town of Yarmouth website. But I cannot let you guys go without saying a gigantic thank you. First of all, to Karen McNeil of Yarmouth Community Services, because it's her, yeah, exactly, her technology that has us all going. And sitting over there in the masks, Sharon McDonald, who started the task force and is an amazing person, and Gro Flatabo, who without her, none of you would have even heard about this. So they get enormous credit for doing, all sorts of work. And I just thank you all so much for being here. Please go listen to this again. And with any great luck, we will have more conversations like this in the future.
And lovely to see the folks from that island off the coast.
Yes, yay, Shabig, yay!
Yay, Shabig.
Okay, take care, everybody.
Good night.
Take care.
Good night. Bye.
Bye-bye.